MacArthur Wheeler. On the morning of January 6, 1995, MacArthur Wheeler left his home convinced that he had discovered a brilliant trick that would make him invisible to cameras. He had previously heard that lemon juice was used in invisible ink, so he came up with a very foolish idea. If lemon hides writing, then maybe it hides faces too. Before carrying out the robbery, he covered his entire face with lemon juice until his eyes were almost burning. Then he tried taking a picture of himself with a Polaroid camera, but the photo came out unclear because of a problem with the camera or the lighting, and that's when the disaster began. Instead of doubting the idea, he considered it scientific proof that it worked. He entered the first bank in the afternoon without any mask at all and looked directly at the cameras with complete confidence. He handed the employee a threatening note, took the money, and then left calmly. Because the first robbery succeeded, he felt like he was the smartest criminal in the city. Less than an hour later, he decided to rob a second bank using the same method. In the evening, the police showed the surveillance camera images on the news, and people recognized him immediately. When they arrested him and showed him the video, he said in genuine shock, "But I put lemon juice on."
Gary Hoy. Gary Hoy worked at a law firm inside a skyscraper in Toronto, and he always liked showing off his knowledge in front of students and interns. Inside the building were very strong windows that were resistant to breaking. Gary had previously discovered that he could slam into them without shattering the glass. At first, it was just a small joke, but over time, it turned into a repeated demonstration that he performed in front of people. Every time he walked away unharmed, his confidence grew even more. Eventually, he began to believe that he understood the building's design better than the engineers themselves. In July 1993, during a tour for law students, he decided to perform the stunt again. He stood in front of the window, stepped back a little, and then ran at full speed toward the glass. The students expected him to bounce off as usual, but this time, the glass remained intact while the entire window frame came loose from its place. Within seconds, Gary fell from the 24th floor in front of everyone and died instantly.
John Orr.
John Orr was a very famous fire investigator in California. Firefighters would personally request him because he had an uncanny ability to identify the exact point where any fire had started. But what no one knew was that John himself was starting the fires. He would usually begin with a small fire inside a store or building, then watch the chaos from a distance. Afterward, he would arrive as an official investigator and begin showing off his brilliance. Over time, he became addicted to the feeling of power. He enjoyed being seen as the smartest person at the scene while he was actually the one who had caused the disaster in the first place. One day, in 1984, a major fire broke out inside a store. After the investigation was completed, police found a small ignition device on a shelf. The device contained a fingerprint. When they analyzed the print, the result was shocking. It belonged to John himself. The police began monitoring him, and then they discovered something even stranger. John was writing fictional novels that described fires with details that closely matched his crimes. In the end, he confessed to setting dozens of fires that killed people and caused enormous losses.
Titanic. When the Titanic set sail in 1912, it was considered the greatest ship in the world. Newspapers described it as the ship that could not sink, and this created excessive confidence among both the crew and the passengers. During the voyage, wireless messages began arriving, warning of massive icebergs in the ocean. Some other ships reduced their speed because of the danger, but the Titanic continued at a high speed. On the night of April 14th, the weather was extremely cold, and the sea was unusually calm, making the ice harder to spot. Suddenly, the lookout shouted, "Iceberg ahead!" The crew tried to change course quickly, but the ship was far too large and moving far too fast. It struck the iceberg, and water began flooding several compartments. At first, many people did not believe that the ship would actually sink, but within hours, it gradually began to tilt, then broke apart and sank completely. There were far fewer lifeboats than passengers, and more than 1,500 people died.
Louis XVI. Before the French Revolution,
France was experiencing a massive economic crisis. The people were suffering from hunger and heavy taxes, while the royal court was living an extremely luxurious lifestyle. Louis XVI was not a decisive ruler. Whenever a problem appeared, he would delay making a decision or change his mind. In Paris, people became increasingly angry and protests began to spread. On July 14, 1789, the people stormed the Bastille prison, and the French Revolution officially began. Instead of taking quick control of the situation, the king continued to hesitate. He then attempted to secretly flee with his family in disguise, but during the journey, someone recognized his face from the portrait printed on the coins. He was arrested and brought back to Paris amid the people's anger. A short time later, he was executed by guillotine in front of a crowd of spectators.
World War II. At the beginning of World War II, Germany achieved remarkable victories. It occupied countries very quickly, and Hitler began to believe that his army was unbeatable. In 1941, he decided to launch a massive operation called Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Many of his generals warned him about the danger of this decision because Russia was enormous and its winter was deadly. But Hitler was convinced that the war would be over within just a few months. At first, the German army advanced rapidly and came close to Moscow. Then winter arrived. Snow covered the roads, fuel froze, and tanks stopped working. The soldiers did not have enough winter clothing, and many of them died from the cold before even entering combat. Then the Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive, and the German army gradually began to collapse. This decision became the turning point that marked the beginning of Germany's defeat in the war.